Okay, we ended the last part of our series on David with this slide, that David will now become king and he will have his residence or create the capital as Jerusalem. Recently there was big discussion about what is the capital of current Israel, and there was an effort to move it to Jerusalem by outside sources, be outside of Israel, but I'm not sure exactly the status of things right at the moment. But for David, he will capture the city of Jerusalem and fortify it and build it up. Okay? Means a city of peace. Now David succeeds in defeating the Philistines. The ongoing threat of the Philistines has been stopped. The second area of success was in the area of faith and religion. Saul had ignored the Ark of the Covenant, but David will bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. David conquers the Ammonites. David conquers the Arameans. He becomes the undisputed master from Egypt to Euphrates. Thus, he was the most powerful ruler of the world in his day, which is quite significant because remember, if you go back further in Old Testament, the most powerful nation at one time was Egypt, and then there was transfers of powers to the Assyrians later on in 700s. And that power transfer will keep occurring. But for right now, at this moment in Bible history, David is the most powerful man in the world. So we have to talk about David's failure, his spiritual failure, or his sin of adultery. Read 2 Samuel 11, verses 1 to 12. So one sin leads to another. To gain Bathsheba, David arranged for Uriah to go to the front in the battle to be killed. Now, already David had summoned Bathsheba to his residence because he desired her. He was up on a rooftop. He saw her bathing. And he thought to himself, wow, here's a woman who really looks good. Now, even though he was married to Saul's daughter, it didn't matter. Adultery was on his mind. And he indeed went with the sin of adultery. Incidentally, I have a video where I tell a true-to-life story about this sin of adultery, and how one pastor did not believe me that there could be up to at least one person in his small congregation committing a sin of adultery, and he didn't believe me, and he got very angry with me because I think he thought he had the perfect congregation. And then one night he was out on his front porch and he heard 2 gunshots. And one gunshot was for the wife who was out committing adultery, and the other gunshot was for the man who killed his own wife. That happened in his community. And believe it or not, he ended up doing the funeral services for the wife. And I don't know, I never talked to him much after that about, do you believe me now? But it was really a tremendous shock to him and to his congregation, his community, that indeed the sin of adultery then led to murder. So David is following that pathway, and he wants to murder Uriah, but he wants to murder him indirectly to make it look like he's innocent. So he puts Uriah in the front line of battle. Now the prophet Nathan will go to David and come up with a wonderful illustration. And this title of this channel is Sermon Illustrations Channel. So the prophet Nathan is given a wonderful illustration by God. And he just goes in and he says to the king, I've got a little story for you. Oh, okay, tell me your story. Well, this man who was a farmer, he was poor and he loved his sheep, and all of a sudden his favorite sheep was gone. It was stolen. What do you think of that, King David? He says, well, that man deserves to die. And then he pointed his finger directly at him and said, thou art the man. In other words, you were the man that stole the sheep, because you took a woman who was married, and you were married. You committed adultery. Now, adultery in today's world is laughed off. It is pushed aside. It is made to sound like it's nothing. I just told you a real-to-life story of a pastor I knew who didn't believe me about the reality of this. He ended up doing funeral services for a woman in his congregation who was committing adultery and later murdered by her own husband. So the internet is now an easy way to cheat or have an affair. In fact, I remember finding out there was actually a site that people could go to if they wanted to, quote, have an affair, if they wanted to experience adultery. It's very common on TV and in movies. It's passed off as falling in love. It's passed off as, well, it's okay because their spouse didn't treat them right, etc., etc. It's still adultery. It's still a sin. It's still very serious. And it leads to other sins like murder or revenge. So what percent of married women today are engaging in an affair? Now don't worry, I'm going to get to the men as well. An affair is just a stupid word for committing adultery. About 65%. Now, you're going to react violently to these statistics, I know. Remember the story I told you of the pastor who acted violently with me. Undressing Infidelity by Diane Shader Smith. Who are these women? They are your neighbors, your friends, your co-workers. They go to the gym. They shop at your grocery store. They are the women you see every day who seem to have it all. Statistics tell us that 65% of married women cheat. No, it's another way of saying they're adulterers. Now listen, I'm going to get to the men, so I'm not exempting them, okay? Who is this Diane Shader Smith? She's Director of Public Relations at Rogers & Cowan in Los Angeles. The company she worked for did business with Microsoft, General Mills, Baja Fresh Foods, and others. She interviewed 150 women who cheated. The women told their stories. She published a book. Many major news sources interviewed her. She said they were good moral women. Well, at least they were. They loved their husband and their children, but they began to flirt. A flirt. People don't think anything of this today, this flirting stuff in the workplace. She almost engaged in an affair. Almost, she said. And she stopped point blank and said, why am I doing this? She almost fell for it. Now that's how great the temptations are today. That's how great this spirit of adultery is today. And she reasoned, I almost did. Others must have felt the same way. And so she got suspicious of this great power pulling her away from marriage and commitment to her husband, commitment to her children. She says there's reasons why. Now again, these are stupid things. People want to justify it. They're bored in their marriage, so they feel it's justifiable. Other reasons they feel are they don't feel pretty and attractive, so they seek out someone who will give them the you're pretty, you're attractive. They want some, quote, excitement. Well, it's the devil telling them it's excitement, like the devil did in Genesis, telling Eve, go ahead and eat of it because it'll be just absolutely wonderful for you. They might even do it as some kind of act of revenge. Who knows what all the insane, crazy things the devil whispers in the ears of a woman or of a man. Men are not exempt. And please don't hear me as some kind of a man that wants to browbeat women. Men are not exempt. The findings listed and information given in this study do not exempt men. Men are guilty. Except the interesting thing that she finds is that things have shifted. Men traditionally have been the ones. Now I'm going to say we're going to go back into the 70s, 60s, 50s, etc. And basically, yeah, the men. But the research in her book indicates now the shift has occurred. Women are leading the way in affairs of the sin of adultery. Now listen, this doesn't exempt men. This doesn't say that men can't be the ones doing it. However, she's saying that because of the enormous number of women in the workforce and the enormous number of women in positions of leadership in companies and so forth, now they've taken the lead. It used to be the men. Let me affirm, men are sinners too. Now affairs are so common that no one is standing up for these old-fashioned values. The old-fashioned values are found in the Bible. Marriage is sacred. The covenant is meant to exclude extramarital sexual relations. Now I might also put on there extramarital flirtations. I might also put on there extramarital involvement in intimate friendship relationships of the opposite sex, because that's what it progresses to. So why do we like to watch this stuff on television? Why do we enjoy the soap operas, and why do we enjoy watching movies about it, and never ever ever put out on the table the consequences, the terrible consequences of homes being broken up because of adultery? So back to David. I went on quite a rage on that because I have seen the great devastation that this easy-go attitude toward adultery has done in our society. Now, David's relationship with his son Absalom was filled with many problems. There was a feud over Tamar, and it ended in tragedy. Absalom was exiled for 3 years. Absalom returns, and there is temporary reconciliation. So once again, we're looking now at family problems. David had a problem in his marriage, and he has a problem with his children. Absalom revolts. Again, that's not uncommon for men, young men, to revolt and to rebel against their family. David will have to flee the city because now his own son is threatening his life. And David plots against his son to take back the throne. David gives orders to spare Absalom, but yet Absalom is killed. And remember the deep, deep bereavement of David. He says, Absalom, Absalom, my son. The terrible bereavement that came upon David because his son was rebellious. And once again, back to rebellion. It was the downfall of Saul, because rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. And incidentally, witchcraft demanded the death of that individual in the Old Testament, according to Israel's regulations and rules and holy commands of God. Now today, everybody thinks it's just interesting and fun to fool with witchcraft. They have no idea how God really feels about it. And God in the Old Testament wanted to have those who were engaging in witchcraft executed. So beware of anything today that brings you close to, in contact with, the occult or witchcraft. So I'd like to thank you for watching this study, and that's as far as I went that summer with the Bible study on the life of David. I hope in some way you received some blessing from this extensive study on the life of David. Thank you for watching, and thank you very much if you got to the end of my study. Blessings in Christ Jesus. This ends the video.